The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome from the General Assembly in the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. And a very warm welcome to our guest, Delegate Joe May. Welcome, sir.
Well, good to be here this morning, Woody.
Thanks for coming. We really appreciate it. Tell us a little bit about the changes in your geographic district as a result of redistricting.
It's pretty extensive. I've had most of Loudoun County, or excuse me, the western half of Loudoun County for quite a few years. And this year, I lost the town of Leesburg, which has a population of about 40,000, because I had way too many people in my district. And I lost a portion of Clark County, which I've represented for 18 years. And I picked up 23,000 constituents in Frederick County, adjacent to Winchester. That's sort of the bad news. The good news is that the folks that I picked up in my new district are really pretty much like the people I grew up with. They're Valley folks, and I'm very comfortable with them. My wife and I have spent a lot of time at the firehouses and other civic events in Frederick County, trying to get a little better acquainted with them. Good people, hard to go wrong with the people that you have to represent there.
Now, this was due to changes in population shifts and a requirement in the U.S. Constitution that every 10 years these geographic boundaries are examined.
Yeah. First of all, the changes weren't at my request. I had 44% larger constituency than the Constitution said I should have. Nominally, we should be representing about 80,000. And I was in the close to 120,000 category.
Now, in that regard, have your committee assignments shifted as well?
No, they haven't. I've served as chairman of Transportation Committee now for several years. I serve on Appropriations Committee, where I also chair the subcommittee on transportation, and then finally I sit on Science and Technology, and I was the chairman of Science and Tech for 6 years.
And I would love for you to share with us your passion for science and technology, because you have a renowned background in that regard, because you hold numerous patents that a lot of people don't know about, but maybe they really do. The one I'm most familiar with is the yellow line.
Well, I have to do a disclaimer there. I don't hold the patent. Our company just did the development work, but on the other hand, it was still a lot of fun, and yeah, we get satisfaction out of that, because we think the football games go a bit better because of the yellow first down line. Probably the one I have that you see more frequently than the yellow first down line is the little yellow sticker on the gas pump that says octane rating.
Yes.
Computed using R+M/2 method. That was my third patent, which was granted many years ago and of course has lapsed. But I still get satisfaction out of it, because it allows people to buy the octane level that will work well with their car, and yet they don't pay too much money for octane rating they don't need.
Great, so. Great. I take it that it may be a little easier this year for the governor's agenda to make it through both the House and the Senate due to changes in the Senate. I guess one example is a bill that's likely to pass this week that has already passed the House, and that's congressional redistricting.
Yeah, the congressional districting, as well as House and Senate redistricting, are always a chore. There's lots of lively debate, but yeah, with the House very firmly in Republican hands with 68 seats, in the Senate with 20 seats plus the lieutenant governor, who has the tie-breaking ability, the ability to get the redistricting bills through have become much easier for the governor. But easier is not the same as saying easy.
Right. There's no guarantee. Now, tell us a little bit about the jurisdiction of your committee and the kinds of matters that you will be responsible for moving through that committee this session.
I chair the Transportation Committee, and we have that legislation which is related to transportation matters, and it varies over a pretty wide range. In fact, I just came from a Transportation Committee meeting, and there we were talking about the specialty license plates. We try to make sure that those make DMV some money and the citizens some satisfaction from having a license plate that represents their point of view. On the other hand, we have lots of land use and transportation policy issues, and those are the really sticky ones. What works well for Clark County may not work at all well for Hampton Roads area. So we're always a little bit challenged in order to make sure that what we're advocating doing or permitting doing works well on a statewide basis.
And of course, the continued funding of transportation needs in the Commonwealth has been the subject of discussion for a number of years around here, especially since we've been facing tough economic times. Last year, the Commonwealth used its bonding authority to help fund some transportation needs. How are things going in terms of funding for maintenance and new capital projects?
Well, sort of restating what you said, we got off to a good start last year with about $4 billion worth of new construction. The problem is that we still have a substantial shortfall in maintenance. There have been a series of efforts to try to come up with legislation which will yield us some sustainable income to take care of the maintenance problem. That has to be something in the neighborhood of $500 million a year. We've made a little progress here and there in the maintenance area, but we're still waiting for the magic bullet which addresses the maintenance problem with long-term sustainable income. We have a couple of bills which have not yet been heard which would address that problem directly and frontally.
And one of the governor's proposals would be to use some portion of the sales tax to generate a little bit additional help for transportation needs.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to say a little bit because it would only raise about 10% of what we really needed for maintenance.
Now, the use of the bonding authority last year was one, I think, that had bipartisan support, not the least of which had to do with the AAA bond rating of the Commonwealth, the ability to borrow at very low cost, and the ability to let contracts, or at least competitively bid contracts, at a time when costs are low to contractors.
That's an interesting point. First of all, Virginia is very, very proud of their AAA bond rating over the years, and they are routinely adjudged to be the best managed state in the nation, and that, frankly, is something I think all of us are proud of. With regard to how much financial benefit there is, at this point, not all that much because money is really pretty inexpensive. But in the Virginia's been around for about 400 years. They've always enjoyed a fiscally conservative reputation, and I'm glad that that's the case. So I expect that Virginia will probably continue the tradition of 400 years and be fiscally conservative to retain the really good bond rating. It does make doing business in Virginia, by Virginia, a lot easier.
Now, there's always talk from one individual or another about raising the gas tax, which apparently hasn't been increased since 1986, coupled with maybe another avenue are public-private partnerships by way of toll roads. What are your views on those?
The answer is we have to address all three of them. Certainly where public-private partnerships and tolling is concerned, we're well on our way with that. The gas tax actually has a couple of problems associated with it. One is gas tax revenues are actually declining at this point, in part because, or in substantial part because cars get better miles to the gallon than they did previously. I need to clear my throat.
That's all right. Take your time.
The other issue is that we have a fixed number of cents per gallon associated with the gas tax, and because gas prices continue to rise, and I expect them to continue to rise, we need to change how we collect that and index it. That is, make it a percentage of the purchase price, so that we don't have the continued erosion of the gas tax revenues. The other part is that the gas tax misses a lot of vehicles that use our roads. For instance, propane-powered cars, alcohol-powered cars, particularly electric cars. Natural gas and propane cars are out there in pretty good numbers, and they don't pay a cent. So we're going to have to find some way to toll them in their use of the roads. We actually have a bill in at this point, which has not yet been heard, which would apply we call it a pump toll, so that every time they came in to recharge their battery, if it's an electric car, or if it's a natural gas powered car, that every time they refill, it's just like refilling with gas or with diesel. So we'll see how that goes. Virginia has a very long history of not rushing into things. As I mentioned a while ago, I carried the legislation that created the Science and Technology Bill, and it took me 3 years to get that through, but we finally got there. Well, there have been a number of attempts over the years here to come up with some sustainable revenues for road maintenance in particular. And House Bill 3202 in 2007 was the last time we had any real success in that area. So it's time.
Good. Can you give us an idea of how difficult it is to balance the needs of a Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads, a South Side, and Central Virginia in terms of transportation needs? We know that Northern Virginia has some of the worst congestion in the nation, but we also know, for example, that Hampton Roads, and especially the area of the tunnel and the fact that there are a lot of waterways down there, create unique needs as well.
And it's absolutely true. People don't realize how big and how disparate Virginia is, and the transportation needs for Roanoke generally are substantially different than those of Hampton Roads, and particularly Northern Virginia. In Northern Virginia, it has a little different edge to it, and that is that a great deal of the state's revenues come from Northern Virginia, and those revenues are transportation dependent. So we cannot afford to dilly-dally, particularly where Northern Virginia is concerned. Hampton Roads is not very far behind in having a comparable situation because, for instance, you're very tunnel limited in the Hampton Roads area, and if one of those tunnels went down, you could turn Norfolk into an island in a hurry, and people would really suffer from an economic standpoint. Well, a convenience standpoint too, but we're trying very hard to address that. In fact, there is some tunnel activity initiated as part of the governor's program going forward. In Northern Virginia, we're building some hot lanes, which will help a bit with the automobile traffic, and we're also extending the metro, particularly out to Dulles Airport and out into Loudoun County. But that has not been without difficulty. In fact, if you were listening to the House exchanges yesterday, we had some really spirited discussion on some legislation to change how the rail to metro is being built.
Yes. Now, the concept of those hot lanes is that individuals willing to have a high occupancy in their automobiles and pay an additional toll during peak hours would be allowed in those hot lanes.
Yes, and it is not cheap during the peak hours. And in fact, I was a little skeptical of that at first, but I was down in Miami not long ago, and they already have hot lanes there. And is it worth it to pay an extra buck if you're late for an appointment or running up against an appointment, or you just absolutely need to go? I think what I saw in Miami was a pretty good indication that people are willing to pay to go.
Now, is there additional technology needed to implement that? For example, the equivalent of an Easy Pass transistor to pick up a vehicle and charge the owner?
That was one of the things that was really nice about it, and that was I didn't have to have a transponder. I didn't have to cough up a credit card, let alone scrounge through my console to see if I had a couple quarters in there. They actually read my license plate and sent me a bill. Now, if I'd had a transponder, they would have accepted that. The same transponder that I use on the Dulles Greenway would have worked there. Automated tolling has finally arrived, and that was a legislative area that Delegate Tom Rust and I had worked on for a couple of years, and that was to make sure that automated tolling was up to date, because if you have a 60-mile-an-hour toll road and you have to stop and put your coins in a hopper, it's no longer a 60-mile-an-hour toll road. Right. It's a great deal less.
Right. Now, what about rail traffic? I understand from time to time I go through Warren County, Front Royal, and there's a sign that says Inland Port. And I've been told that basically there's rail traffic that comes up from the Norfolk area, brings up products that's distributed by truck and rail throughout the state.
Absolutely, rail is an integral part of what we consider the transportation solution going forward. The inland port is a place where they collect the containers off tractor trailers, and sometimes they're headed to the port, and sometimes they're from the port, or excuse me, from the Norfolk port to the inland port there at Front Royal. I honestly expect the inland port and container on flat car and container on trailer to be, or trailers on flat cars to become an integral part of the solution to Interstate 81, because quite a few of the trucks that are on there can be put on rail, and there doesn't appear to be any losers out of such an approach to it. We've actually put some additional money into that. Speaking of the Hampton Roads Port, I own a manufacturing facility in Danville, and we get a lot of our bulky material in through the port at Norfolk, comes up by rail or by truck to Danville, and then back out again. And I guess we had sort of given railroads the death knell some years ago, and as it turns out, they're working very, very nicely with the port at Norfolk. And we think that there's a future for it in relieving Interstate 81 along the western border of Virginia.
And I understand that commerce may increase over time once the Panama Canal is modernized to accommodate much larger ships. It's going to increase traffic through our ports here in Virginia, which will increase commerce here as well.
I actually, talking about objectives of the General Assembly and particularly of the governor, and that is that we're making a concerted effort to bring back work, particularly manufacturing work, that had gone offshore to onshore. And in fact, the facility that we have in Danville, we often refer to it as onshoring to Danville. And we have our first pieces of business, which had been done previously in China, back in Danville. And one of the reasons we can do it is that we do have the rail and the port, because we have to buy some of the fabricated metal parts offshore, bring them in, and use them there.
Great. Now, one of the things that was in the news, at least last year, maybe recently again, was the opening of a new Department of Defense facility right off 395 in Shirlington in Northern Virginia as a result of base realignment issues. And there's still a question about the increase in traffic there, the fact that there's little ingress or egress, there's no metro rail available. What's going on with that?
I'm afraid that somebody was guilty of some poor pre-planning. What we're doing is trying to address it by making some relatively small changes in how the traffic flows and what's available. In fact, let's see, you're out of the Hampton Roads area, are you not?
No, I actually live in Spotsylvania.
Oh, really? Okay. I was about to comment that one of the things we're doing is using mathematical modeling at the Fort Belvoir location to say, if we make this change, if we add a westbound lane, if we add an eastbound lane, if we make it all one way, we can model that mathematically and predict what's going to happen so that whatever it is that we do, we get the most bang for the buck. And that's one of the really nice parts about technology, that it turns out to be useful in places that you didn't anticipate. So Fort Belvoir wasn't very well thought out. Easy for me to throw rocks from my protected position here, because that was done at the Pentagon level, at national level, and we didn't have much in it. Unfortunately, we're left with having to address the issue.
Sure. Government reform and efficiency. The governor has suggested that a number of state agencies that have overlapping duties and responsibilities be consolidated, and I think he's asked everyone to take a look at state agencies. VDOT, of course, has had a number of audits. How are things going with VDOT these days?
Making some good progress in that respect. VDOT used to be seen as a pick and shovel operation. I mean, they basically built things. That's changing, and a great deal of that effort is going to private industry, and VDOT will operate basically as project managers, and I think that's appropriate.
Now, how critical is transportation to maintaining the employment base we have here and attracting new employers?
Only as critical as it can be, because I own a business in Northern Virginia, and when I look at the issues that are in front of me, one of the biggest ones is my ability to, one, get my employees to work, two, get my products to market, three, to get my customers to me. And if I can't do all three of those, I really don't have a business. And we're located out near Dulles Airport, and Route 28, which provides our transportation ingress and egress, was a 2-lane road when we moved there 34 years ago. It's now 8 lanes wide and steadily growing, but if those improvements hadn't been made, my business wouldn't have been there. So transportation is, I consider it to be a utility, and you have to, in the same way you have to have heat and light and sewer and water, you have to have transportation, or you don't have an activity.
Now, what about your business in Danville? Are there any pressing transportation needs in that area?
Only in terms of getting material in and out, and that was one of the really pleasant surprises. There's a nice railhead there, so that for really big and bulky items, we have an easy way to get it to us in Danville for our manufacturing operations.
Now, what are some of the puts and takes? We talked a little bit earlier about the gas tax, and we also talked a little bit about tolls. Absent the other complicating factors that you mentioned earlier, what are some of the pros and cons of a general tax versus a toll?
Well, there are those who say that there's not much difference, but typically a toll is a cost which can be directly related to the activity that you're doing. If I'm collecting income tax, for instance, it's not earmarked. It goes into the general fund and it's used for a whole lot of things. By the way, primarily education, but in general, a tax is not earmarked. A toll is very much earmarked. It's basically a fee for the use of some facility or for receiving some service.
Now, a lot of my neighbors and friends always ask me, or they tell me, do those guys really work that hard up there? And I say, yes, they do. Now, there are subcommittee meetings that start at 7 a.m., and I know that you and many of your colleagues work late into the night. Give us an idea of what a day in the life of Delegate Joe May is like.
Yesterday was an excellent example. First call here in front of a committee was at 7:30 a.m., which means I was up at 6:30. And you say, well, no big deal, except that I had in succession 2 committee meetings, had to prepare for the House floor, talked to at least 8 different interest groups or citizens groups, made it to caucus a little late at 11:30 on the House floor, had to defend my House Bill 252, which frankly was a real workout. Then into appropriations. I went back, grabbed a sandwich, and saw 2 people while I was eating my sandwich. Then in appropriations, a half hour after adjournment. In appropriations till 5:30 at a 6 o'clock appointment with a telecommunications group, and finished. I walked into the apartment at 10:45.
And then every once in a while you get to go home on the weekends.
It looks like I will this weekend. The grandkids are coming, and I don't care. I'm going. I'm going to see the grandkids.
Great. Well, I promise you an opportunity to let your constituents know how to contact you. Please go ahead.
Good. Thanks for that opportunity, because particularly during session, I enjoy hearing from the folks back home. You don't realize how big Virginia is till you see how many people come by that you've never seen in your life. First of all, you can reach me here. I'm in room 504 in the General Assembly building. At home, you can email us at joetmay@aol.com. My real name is Joe, so it's joetmay@aol.com. Pleased to hear from you that way. We hear from 400 or 500 people a day. If you want to call and make an appointment, call 703-777-9484, and that will allow you to be connected with my staff here in Richmond. Always glad to see people.
Thank you for being here, Delegate Joe May. We appreciate your time and your public service.
Thank you, and my pleasure to be here.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.